You look like an angel the way the light is above your head.
Can you see me?
I
There I
can't.
am.
Hello,
Yeah.
Auntie.
There I am.
How are ya?
Yeah. Yeah, I must admit, I'm a little, a little techie, nervous sometimes until I actually get in. Anyway, things never happen slowly. Either I have absolutely nothing doing or else I have a lot of things doing. So
So
this
today's
morning,
busy for you.
well, yesterday and today we're both busy, and tomorrow, I believe it or not, I have two people coming at 9 o'clock to clean my house.
Oh,
So I am doing this because Rochelle thinks I should. So I guess I'm starting to age. I have a book called Aging Disgracefully, but anyway, I'm trying to age gracefully.
Well, which would be more fun, I wonder.
I don't know.
okay. So how do you guys feel about talking about your grandparents today?
Well, it takes us back a few years.
Yeah.
I think it does. Not everybody really gets the opportunity to know their grandparents.
No, that's exactly right.
And I think geography is a lot of that. Or, who knows? Sometimes people also die. Like, we didn't get to know, Grandpa's dad because he had that accident.
Yes.
I didn't get to know Grandpa White. Mind you, their own kids didn't even have much time with him.
Yeah.
Right.
I've heard other people, coworkers and other people talk about their relationship with their grandparents. And I'm finding out that sometimes people didn't have a good relationship or they didn't know them. And I think about how, like, listen, you can't know your grandparents as well as you do when they're one row of evergreens away.
Yeah.
Grandma White was also quite a bit in our lives, but of course lived in Winnipeg. So it wasn't a daily thing, but you guys lived in pretty close proximity to both parties.
Mm-hmm.
True.
Yeah, we were lucky that way. That's for
Yeah.
sure. So, and Bob and I were from different. 5 years is quite a bit of difference. So some of the things that we would have experienced together, and other things we would have experienced in a different way. So anyway, yeah.
So who did you want to talk about first?
I'm fine either way.
Okay, well, let's go with the Booker connection. Okay. And do you want me to read and then just pop in whenever you want and just, okay.
I love it. So Auntie, first of all, for those that don't know, you're reading some of the thoughts that you've recorded, and this one's entitled My Grandparents as I Remember Them by Mary McNabb.
Yes, thank you. Okay.
And I have a copy of that, not in front of me, but I came across it last night when I was going through boxes of stuff.
Okay, so you didn't make a copy. All right. Well, anyway, you just jump right in when you want. So I just said I was very fortunate to have grandparents in my life. Each was different, and some I knew better than others. But as I look back on my life and also consider my life today at age 83, well, now it's 87, I realized they influenced me in so many positive ways. They did not come from rich financial backgrounds, but from backgrounds with strong family roots. So starting with Grandma and Grandpa Booker, they both grew up in Dunnville, Ontario, which is just north of Lake Erie. It would have been a rich farming area with a variety of crops growing, including many horticultural ones. They would have both attended the weekly Bible study groups at their Methodist church and soon became attracted to each other. I guess you would say they were courting. So then Grandpa Booker, I'm starting with Grandpa. Grandpa and his three brothers lost their mother when they were quite young. Their father remarried with a second family to care for. It was obvious the boys would need to make their own way in life, so hearing there was land in the West, they went out to try their luck. Two of the brothers went on to Saskatchewan to homestead, but Grandpa George and his brother Mark found land near the village of Snowflake. They were on quarter sections on the same section of land. I know that he went back to Ontario, married Elsie Doan on Christmas Day, and they began their lives together, raising a large family of 8 boys and 3 girls. My mother, Gertie, was the first one, with 10 more to follow. 2-year intervals. Can you imagine that, eh?
No, I really can't.
Mm.
I don't even have one kid. How can I imagine 11?
Yeah, I know. I remember lots of things, little things about Grandpa. First of all, his finger. He had lost his finger, the fingers from his left hand in an accident with the windmill, and had his thumb, just his thumb remaining on that hand. And as I remember, I don't know if I ever saw it without the glove that he had on it, sort of a leather glove. And that, no doubt, was a great handicap, but he didn't let that stop him. He had boys who could do the manual work, and he loved to grow a big garden with every kind of vegetable and fruit trees. Those were very important to him. The yard was a source of pride for them both, and they had perennials all around the perimeter inside a fence, as it was a farm with animals. In later years, when they had retired to town, he and Grandma loved to find new plant species to add to their yard. They had an arbor just outside the side door with ivy growing over it and around it. And I remember Myrna mentioning that Grandma wasn't, as though she was a very honest woman, she wasn't above snipping, having a little scissors in her pocket and snipping off a little bit of a plant from a park somewhere where she probably wasn't supposed to, but anyway, she did. Grandpa had to learn to write and do many things with his left hand, but that thumb sure helped to hold and guide things like a saw or a nail. Also, he drove a car somewhat aggressively. Bob, you may want to add to that. Shifting gears with the thumb holding the steering wheel. Grandpa, Bob, do you want to add to that?
Okay. Yes. Well, what I could add is the interesting thing. You said aggressively. I remember one time driving to the dentist, or actually to Morden with Grandpa, and Amy Dew was a passenger, and we got onto the stretch of road between Laravere and Manitou, where there was now pavement, and he opened it up a bit, and Amy looked sideways and she said, "Mr. Booker, do you know you're doing 60?" And he said, "Oh, yes, I'm just fine."
Well, Grandma was very, she didn't drive and she just trusted Grandpa, never worried about anything when he was driving. Anyway, Grandpa had only grade 5 education, a formal education, but he was a great reader and he had a whole set of books of knowledge, which we were allowed to look at if we proved trustworthy. He was the superintendent of our Sunday school for as long as I could remember. Mostly I remember him as a quiet and kind man who lived a good life with the woman he loved. Anything more there, Bob?
No, I think it's good so far.
Okay, we'll carry on, and then maybe at the end we'll come up with something. Grandma Booker, what a woman. She followed the love of her life to a quarter section of land and an unknown future. She took it on faith. Of course, that was long before my time, so I can only go by what was told to me by my mother and other family members. If I only had one word to describe her, it would be serene. I am sure her boys knew her to be anything but serene when she was dealing with their antics. When you were at Grandma's, whether it was on the farm or later in the townhouse, you knew exactly where you stood. I was accepted as I was, never talked down to, but was included in any household or yard tasks that were to be done. I remember the boys saying that she used to give them, when they didn't behave, she gave them a thimble pie. That was, you had a thimble on your finger.
Yeah.
I remember her rest time on the farm, taken sitting in the rocking chair in the kitchen, sort of behind it, had sort of a door with windows in it, and she'd be peeling potatoes or darning socks. Can you even begin to imagine how many she peeled and darned? There was a set of quintuplet dolls that I could carefully play with once I was old enough. There was the pancake dough to help stir, the potatoes to wash, the eggs to help gather, the lovely dumb waiter to carefully raise where the milk, butter, and eggs were kept cool. And I loved when they took potatoes out of the garden and they pumped water into a pail, had a stick, and the stick went round and round really fast in the pail, and most of the skins came off the new potatoes, and that was saved a lot of peeling, and it saved a lot of potato too. Like Grandma had a strong faith. She didn't preach her religion, she lived it. She and Grandpa had sons, Clarence, Eldon, and Wilbur, in the Army overseas in World War II, and Jack, the youngest, signed up to the Air Force. How worried she must have been, but we children were never told of her fears. We never doubted that they would come back. In my teen years, they lived in the house in Snowflake, in a new house, and I spent many an afternoon there if there was something I had on, like sports or church group. Dad would be coming in to curl in the evening, and Bob and I would go skating. We would have a simple supper, maybe pancakes, then do the dishes, after which I got my homework done in the upstairs bedroom. Grandma, my mom and aunties often had a quilt set up in the living room, and that is where I learned to quilt. She used every scrap she could get her hands on and was never too proud to beg. She also made many braided rugs, even when her hands were crippled with arthritis. I have given mine to Bonnie for her country home. Together, she and Grandpa made all kinds of things. The grandkids got homemade presents for Christmas. I am now using a sugar sack luncheon cloth she crocheted around as a cover for my famous buns as they rise, and I still am using that. The rack for hanging ironing to dry has been used in my bathroom for towels for many years. They wasted nothing. Grandpa and Grandma were in good health long enough to celebrate their 60th anniversary, which had to be held in the hall in Snowflake as there were so many of us. They always looked so contented to be with each other. Both passed away in their late 80s. So that's it for Grandma and Grandpa Booker.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, I could just add something if it's appropriate. When they built the new house in town, there was a house on the property, an old house. And so they decided to tear it down and salvage any lumber that was worth saving.
Ooh.
And even though that was 1947, I believe, I was only 5 years old, but I remember climbing around in that old house and pulling a few nails. And when they were putting up the new one, I drove a few nails in that too.
And I don't even remember that house, isn't that something? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And of course, that was, quite an event for them to move off the farm and into town.
Yeah.
But I guess for probably around 2 years, Wilbur and Lillian lived in the same house on the farm. They shared the space there somehow, even though it wasn't very much space. Until they got the new house built in town and got moved. Well, actually, there was a time in between when they lived in a small house.
It was the Lane House. It was called the Lane House.
The Lane House, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was over across from the pool house over on that street. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I do remember going to visit them there and actually stayed overnight one time while they were there.
Yeah.
Were you referring to the house that they raised their children in as small?
Well, it was small too, very small by comparison. I have some good pictures of that as well. But there was the part that had the upstairs in it just had a small living room and one bedroom, and then the upstairs, if I remember, it had 2 bedrooms, and then the kitchen was like a lean-to built onto that.
It was a fair size. The kitchen was a fair size.
Yes, and then I believe there was a some would call it a woodshed or a porch built onto that again for the entrance.
So if you were coming in from outside, you first stepped into the kind of a little porch, and then you stepped into the side porch, which had the wash basin, the roller towel, the door to the cellar, and then you walked into the main kitchen, which had, of course, a big table and not built-in cupboards, but a special kind of a cupboard with lined with tin to keep mice and stuff out. They were
right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and there was a dumbwaiter in the corner, which wasn't a person at all. It was a thing they just moved up on pulleys that moved up from the basement when.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so no, it was certainly not a large house. It would be very testy these days to try to have that many people under one
Oh,
roof.
yeah.
Did Wayne and Esther Ginther ever build onto that house? Like, I've been in that house.
They lived in that house for a short while before they built their new house.
Okay. Okay.
And at that time, they even changed the kitchen around a bit, so they had built-in cupboards on the south side. Yeah, it was
Okay. Mm-hmm.
quite nice. Yeah. Okay.
That's a lot of kids to have under one roof, no matter how big your house is.
Well, come summer, in the summertime, they had a sleeping accommodation outside. I forget what the bunkhouse. They call it a bunkhouse.
The bunkhouse.
And that's
Yeah.
where the boys went out in the summer. I can't even imagine the antics that went on out there. But, and the bedding that had to be washed, but gross. All those boys. Of course, they weren't all there at the same time, because like 2 years between. So between Uncle Albert, not Uncle Albert, Uncle Leslie and Jack, there were quite a few years. So I think
Yeah,
Uncle
20
Leslie's probably
20 years. 20 years
gone.
between them, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Gone before Jack was born after Mom and Dad were married. So yeah.
Well, I think the year before they were married, if I remember right. But anyway.
Okay.
Anyway, it was close to the same time. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So, from what I hear about Grandma and Grandpa Booker isn't a lot. It's hard to get past the 11 children.
Yeah.
Like, I almost don't know much about them other than the reaction that I have when I hear about 11 children, which is a lot of kids. That's part of this conversation, right? Is I want to get over that and just see who they are as people. But yeah.
Well, they took life as it came, didn't they, Bob?
They took which?
They took life as it came.
Oh, yes.
And other families' lives were maybe not too different. There was a lot of big families in the area. So, and that's where they didn't have to buy much at the store because they grew most of their own stuff and made do with what they had.
Yeah, that was the way back then, was to, have a big garden, have your own livestock, have your own eggs. And you didn't buy much at the store. And certainly, you had green stuff when it was in season. Otherwise, you didn't. The store didn't carry very much fresh stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And mostly the staples of flour and sugar and that kind of stuff was what you made sure you had lots of.
Yeah, porridge stuff. Ground their own grain for porridge. Yeah, sorry.
So how did they do that? How did they ground their own grain?
It would be using the same grinder they used for the cattle.
Wow.
And it was actually driven by the windmill on top of the barn, the same one that took Grandpa's fingers off.
Mm-hmm.
He was up servicing the windmill, and he slipped and he caught his hand in it. It took the 4 fingers off that one hand.
Oh, and that must have been really difficult for him to really do all the things he had to do, like anybody at all. Like, if you need your hands. So yeah, that's really something to work around.
I don't know whether I know the exact time when that happened. I think they already had maybe 3 or 4 children at that time. Maybe it was later than that. I don't know. But anyway, it ended up that, the boys, and I suppose the girls to some extent too, learned to help out with the chores as they needed to be done.
So there's a little more to that story too, that when that happened, there was no doctor in Snowflake. And my mom, Gertie, took a horse and buggy to Hannah to get the doctor, as I recall this, and brought the doctor back to the farm. And Pearl Finley came and acted as nurse while the doctor operated on Grandpa's hand, and I guess must have taken the mangled fingers off. And there's nobody else to ask that story, but that's as I remember it, the story.
That's probably right. I don't know whether I had heard all of that or not, but no, you certainly didn't just jump in the car and run to the nearest hospital because it wasn't there.
So to go to Hannah would be about 6 miles, probably, hey, Bob?
Yeah, from where they were, 7 or 8, I guess. But, well, of course, they could go across country, so
Yeah.
would save a little distance. Yeah.
Yeah. And also, like, Grandma did get to go, Grandpa did see that Grandma got to go back to Ontario to visit her family couple of times. She took, somewhere it tells, I've got it, I think I've sent you, Bob, the mother's write-up that she did, yes, herself. I think you've all got mother's write-up about
Yeah.
how she stayed home and helped to can stuff and everything else. Well, yeah. Anyway, that's the other story, my mom's story.
Well, I should have that, but I haven't seen it for a
Well,
long
I'll have
time.
to look through it and see. You've got it there.
I got it right here. Yeah.
Mhm.
The what I was wondering about too is, as children and then growing up with your grandparents nearby, how often would you see them?
Every Sunday morning, I saw Grandpa Booker at Sunday school.
Mhm.
And Sunday evening, I would see them both at church, I guess.
Yeah, and well, once they moved to town, then it was very common for us to maybe go over there after school. For instance, if we had a
Mhm.
oh, cub or scout meeting, for instance, after the meeting, then I'd go over there and probably go then skating afterwards, and then the folks would come into town for curling or whatever, and then we'd get home that night afterwards.
Mhm.
Or the odd time, well, we'd stay overnight at Grandma's.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking that they must have babysat you from time to time, and I would have lots of memories of that, of Grandma and Grandpa helping out with when you guys were on vacation or when Mom had to teach piano, and there was lots of time spent over there.
Yeah. Well, as a kid, I don't remember ever hearing the word babysitting. It was
No.
never used.
No.
But you got to go and visit and spend a little bit of time with Grandma or Grandpa. Usually they'd arrange for us to have a little holiday in the summertime, so you maybe get a sleepover. And summer, but definitely not in the winter because there was no room left in the house for anybody.
No.
So,
And other than the word serene, how would you describe their personalities? Like, for me, Grandpa was just a real teaser. He's always teasing us kids. And well, that wasn't all Grandpa was like, but and then like Grandma was just like so like the sweetest, nicest lady you could ever meet. So I was just wondering, further to what Auntie wrote, is there anything you sort of think of right off the bat when you think of the way they were with you?
Well, my grandma was a very, I guess you'd say, a solemn person. You very rarely saw her laugh, although the odd time we did. And she wasn't one to joke around. Grandpa liked to joke a little bit, and Grandma did not see anything funny at all about his jokes.
she'd just carry on with what she was doing and pretend
Yeah.
she didn't hear them.
Yeah.
Maybe you can comment on this, but like if Vern lived with them too, and so after the supper, like she'd get up from the table and she'd say, "Come, George," or "Come, Vern," and there was no question. It meant help pick up the dishes and take them to the little laundry room and do the dishes. Like she just that's the way she was. You didn't. This little woman, you didn't mess with her. She was never unkind, but she just would say, "Come, George. Come, Vern." And she took charge, that way, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm sure she learned that early because she had lots of responsibility to carry out there.
Well, it was probably really nice to have them just you go the back lane. Did you guys take the back lane to get there, or did you not use the back lane back then?
Oh, yes, we did in season.
Yeah.
And of course, the road, if anything, was, less perfect back in those years. It was often just a two-rut trail.
Trail.
Yeah.
Yeah. But no, we weren't back and forth just constantly. Like you didn't just say, "Oh, where's Mary?" and she's off somewhere on the bike to Grandma's or whatever. It was kind of planned, I guess, as I remember it anyway.
Yes. Uh-huh. Yeah, I don't remember ever
We had
taking off.
chores to do at home and stuff like that too. So
Yeah, typically didn't we just didn't decide on our own to go somewhere without letting anybody know. It was always confirmed one way or the other.
Yeah.
Well, and Auntie, you read on a different video about at Christmas time what you had recorded about Christmas time. So obviously, you guys had lots of Thanksgivings and Christmases together.
That's for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I do remember, there weren't many, but there was a couple of times I remember being at the farm home when Grandpa and Grandma still lived there for the Christmas celebration. And that was really a tight arrangement because there was a lot of people to come and accommodate one way or another. But then, of course, once they moved into town, then we started circulating the celebration, and we would have it at their place one time, and then it would be at the MacArthur's place or at the Bowdens or at Hillman's. And it also went to Roy Norman's place too.
Now, is there anything you remember about the farm or your childhood about Christmas that you want to share?
I certainly do, and I will read it from here. Okay. On Christmas Day morning, we were allowed to open our stockings that hung from a clothesline in the kitchen. They were long stockings, and so you were always hopeful they'd be full. But they would contain candy, peanuts in the shell, an orange, and a small present from Santa. He had many other places to go, so we had to spread the presents around. Then we had to wait until Dad had come in from the barn and we had eaten breakfast before our family presents were opened. There were usually pajamas or mittens and maybe a toy. One year, Bob got a train, which was a real hit. I got a rubber Weddams doll once, and later my doll that cried and whose eyes would open and close. I still have her, by the way. As mentioned, my dad made me a neat little cupboard from orange boxes. And then he did that at night. So, of course, I was wondering what the pounding was going on when I was in bed, but he was making this neat little cupboard. And it's sitting here right beside me. I still have it.
Is it still white?
Yeah, it is white. Then it was a hurry up and get ready as our family joined the Booker side of the family for the noon meal. An afternoon of fun and games with the cousins, and then a supper of leftovers from the noon meal. I think the Darlingford cousins didn't come often as they came to the summer gatherings. But Doreen, I talked to Doreen and she said she remembers coming once or twice.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Then we headed home because there were cows to be milked. And the mums would bring food. Turkey was a special treat because you didn't have it hardly ever. Of course, there were places were empty because some of our uncles were away at the war. The two Uncle Bills loved Christmas pudding, so that went with the noon meal. But for me, I could hardly wait for the ice cream at supper time because you didn't have it at the store, it just had to be homemade.
Yeah, it was made on the spot, yeah.
My parents probably brought that the dad was very good at making it. Mom was good at making the custard for it. In the afternoon, there'd be the opening of small presents, many of them homemade. Aunt Violet made doll clothes on one year, and I still have a couple of items stored with my precious doll. One year, Grandma lit the candles on the Christmas tree after we all sat very quietly. It would have been a special moment, but must have been only for a very short time. Obviously, you wouldn't do that today. No. I should mention that George and Elsie Booker, my maternal grandparents, were married on Christmas Day in 1901, so it was easy to remember their anniversary. On their 50th, the celebration was held at Bowden's, and on their 60th, we rented the Snowflake Hall. What a serene couple they were, and so devoted to each other. With 11 children and so many grandkids, they had given much and demanded little. So that's my Christmas.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Past. Yeah. Yeah, it was a good time, and nobody seemed to mind being pressed up close to each other. I still always immediately think of toilet issues. It must have been interesting trying to get that many bums looked after.
Oh, you made sure.
I always think of that because to me it's very important to have a good place to go.
Yeah, and you always made sure that the pail was empty Christmas morning.
Absolutely.
Wow, I have nothing to contribute on that front, I'm happy to say.
I remember.
And then, as far as pictures go, without you guys sending me pictures, the only one I had in all of the slides was a picture of great grandma and grandma Booker holding Rob as a baby.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Because really, they wouldn't be in our slides because they wouldn't have been around.
No.
That's right, yeah. Yeah, just as a point of interest, like after Grandpa moved into town, then he was still very interested in what was going on out at the farm. So he would take Vern and they would go out to the farm and help Wilbur, and maybe work with the garden and things like that too. And often Grandpa would come in through our yard and out the back lane, and he'd always have some little thing. He when he got a lawnmower, then he figured out that if he'd bring it out to me, I could tinker with it and get it working right for him.
Imagine that.
What?
And of course was, once we got into the 1953 or 4 in that area somewhere. But in the years before, well, of course, I hadn't got quite that far yet.
And I would imagine that Grandma and Grandpa Booker are buried at the Snowflake Cemetery.
Oh, yes.
Yes, right.
Yes.
So.
And you were mentioning that, Mary, Grandpa was superintendent of the Sunday school for a lot of years. And he was indeed, I don't know how many. And then Ed Finley took over for a while.
Oh, did he?
And I think Earl Booker for a short while. And then Landon after that. And then I was superintendent for many, many years after that.
Where did Elgin fit into all that? Because he served 48 years.
He was the secretary treasurer of the church for an awful lot of years.
Yeah.
He was never active that I know of in the Sunday school part.
And the funny part is, Bob, they were very much church people, but they really weren't into reading the Bible and stuff with us kids. That wasn't something they did.
No, it wasn't.
No. So anyway.
We didn't doubt that they were, believed strongly in religion, but they just didn't show it outwardly, I guess.
Yeah.
They must have viewed it as sort of private.
Well, there was that attitude. Yeah. Not like the evangelical people who like to talk it up and spread it everywhere they go. And who knows what's right, but
well, Dad was from Presbyterian stock, don't forget. The Dour Presbyterians. Grandpa and Grandpa Booker were from Methodist stock, so they were a little more, yeah. Anyway.
Auntie, you're so funny.
I guess none of us have it recorded anywhere, but the way Grandpa Booker said the table grace, there was just a certain way that he expressed everything, and I can't exactly mimic it, but
the words all ran together, didn't they? Sort of, it was, yeah.
I'm curious if you can remember the sound of their voices.
Well, to a point, although I guess over time they become less faint in the memory.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or less strong, I should say.
Yeah.
Yeah. I never tried to do that until I couldn't hear Grandpa's voice. I have an idea of everything Grandpa, but could not hear his voice. And then I got to hear that recording with that.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I know where you are. Yeah, you're right next to Stowe Range there.
What are you going to do? Just pick your question up, eh?
Probably going to take.
And I heard a little tiny sentence, and I could remember it again.
Yeah.
It's really funny. I wish there'd been more. It was very small. I listened to it over and over, but I don't have the same problem remembering Grandma. And funnily enough, I really can't not remember Aunt Myrna. She had such a specific way of talking. And she was so mischievous, and she had that swaying way of saying things that just is tattooed in my brain. And it's not that I would have heard Aunt Myrna's voice a lot in my life because she wasn't there all the time, but man, she had a really specific way of talking.
I guess when you were with her, she would be doing most of the talking.
Well, I just you all have your own sound, but there's just something funny to me about Aunt Myrna. And she'd always say the same thing to us kids. You're growing like a weed every time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And she definitely had that sparkle in her eye, like Lynn described recently that Grandpa had. Absolutely.
Anytime that I say something inappropriate, a little off color, whatever, especially to my kids or to my family, I'll say, well, Auntie Myrna's gone, so somebody has to do it. She had a lot of nice little naughty jokes. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's so
Mhm.
funny. Actually, speaking of that, Auntie, I do not want this to time out because I have a very specific question to
Okay.
ask you, and I
Okay.
don't want to save it till the
All right.
end.
So,
And then maybe if you guys are satisfied that we finished with the Bookers, we can move on to the Fairbrants here in a minute.
are you okay with that, Bob?
I think so. We have to make sure we give fair time here.
Yeah.
Both
So,
sides of the-
so Auntie, I need to know more. So remember before when we were doing the video about the farmhouse?
Yes.
Okay, and I had Rob's video and we were going room for room and we were talking about the cot. Okay, so now Auntie, you dropped a little teaser and you said something about how you were alluding to that some X-rated things happened on the cot. And I was
on
like,
the couch. You mean on the couch?
well, I call it the cot, but it's the little kitchen couch. Okay,
Yeah.
and then I did recall that you could take a peek at the cistern from the kitchen.
Yes, there was a door. Now, was at any point, Eleanor, do you remember there being a couch?
Yes,
What
I
they
want
called
to
the
talk
couch in the
about.
kitchen?
Are we talking about the napping cot? I absolutely
Yeah.
want to talk about that. It's
Right.
so unusual to have a cot in the kitchen.
And you know, Gordon inherited that from Dad because when he just loved that, and every house we were in had to have a couch in one of the rooms.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, like he just loved that.
So he didn't go and lay down in the bedroom and have a nap. He
Oh,
liked to
no.
lay under the window in the kitchen where it probably wasn't quiet. And he would nap there.
Yeah.
Huh. And he was a
And
napper.
that same cot or couch was in the old house, too, in the kitchen.
Mhm.
Yeah.
There was a lot of stuff went on that couch too that my little brother might not have known about. But anyway,
I might not have.
or maybe you did, and I just didn't know it.
Okay, now the cot's getting dirty. The cot was innocent a minute ago.
No wonder Gordon liked that couch so much.
Okay, and then I was okay to leave it there. And I was like, oh, I thought the cot was just innocent. I didn't know there was all kinds of things going on. And I want to tell you something. It has haunted me ever since that conversation because I'm like, now I want to know. I want to know the details. So who was having a bunch of fun on the cot?
Well, Gordon and me, of course.
Oh, I did not know, of course.
And I remember Butch and Grace were at our place too, Bob, and I think maybe they were in the living room and we were in the kitchen.
I see. Okay.
Oh
Mhm.
my goodness. And you said, well, I'll run the clip, but you said Uncle Gordon, that's why, and he has the cot, and that's why he was so happy about having the cot because of all the things that, I seriously thought, it's funny because I don't want to know details about parents at all. And don't need to know. It's, when you're a kid and there's four of you, you
I
literally
know.
say to each other, well, that means mom and dad did it for sure 4 times.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I know. I know.
And
Oh,
so-
my kids to this day, they don't want to hear anything. Don't go there.
Yeah, I'm like that. But I actually thought you were going to say Grandma and Grandpa, and I was going to say, if you had said that, I was going to say, and the innocence of me to think that my biggest concern was that Buff might see Grandma in her bra waving to the bus in the morning when they were standing right above the cot. And I thought, oh my God, I'll bet you there's a million other things that I should have been more worried about.
It's funny though, like my grandkids or other people, they like to hear weird stories like that. It's your own kids that just don't want to hear that. Why that is, don't ask me. And
I
yet
guess
mother didn't mind telling us that she and Grandpa had miles of it. So there you go.
Yeah.
Like my mom was You know, my mom got to be quite feisty in lots of ways too. You know, one time, Andy Murray, you know what she was like,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe you don't.
Yes, I do.
She always had naughty stories and everything. It was less than a minute.
Yeah.
Okay. So
I'm
we
glad
were
you saw
talking about sex anyway. And one time Grandma said, well, I've had miles of it. Miles of it.
I know. And then didn't you say, when I replied to that, I said, what did she mean by miles? And you said, well, she didn't say kilometers.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Do you know what was funny? When Rob and Betty stayed at your place, Auntie, and they were in the spare room there, and I think they said that it used to be Grandma and Grandpa's bed, and I immediately said, well, they had miles of sex on that bed. and Rob was like, oh, and I said, well, maybe more on the bed before that, we don't know, but they probably could have had more than one bed in their lifetime.
Oh, I know.
Okay, Auntie,
Yeah.
I think I'll sleep better. I really needed to know what, but when you said, of course, I didn't guess that it was you. So isn't that funny?
I have to interject something while we're still on the topic of bras and so on. Going through pictures last night, I came across a picture of Mom sitting at the sewing machine in the upstairs hallway, just in her very minimal clothes.
No way.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Nice.
yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, she often liked to get down to minimal things around the house.
Well, and it was the bra and the slacks went on. I'm using the name. The brassiere and the slacks went on. Not the blouse yet. So I wondered if that was a menopause thing or not, but she would putter around the house. It was the most normal thing. They'd eat breakfast. She'd just have her bra on.
And we'd always tease her and say, one of these times the Watkins man is going to be going
Right.
past the window. And
Did she do that when you were kids?
Well, I don't know. I don't remember that very much. But
Because I thought one day she'd forget. And when Buff picked us up and would wave, they would always, like that picture window, they would always wave to Buff. And I used to just have terrible anxiety that, what if Grandma forgets her blouse when I'm never going to hear the end of it? And Buff's going to yell it and it's going to be loud and everyone will hear. And I used to really stress out about the bus. I just did. I still do.
no, you're funny.
I probably still have a dream that I missed the bus, or like there was many times the bus was coming down the lane and I still had the curling iron in my hair. Like it was very unpredictable. He was early or late. But Buff was not somebody I wanted to start having him teasing me. How do you know Buff?
How do I know Buff?
Yeah.
Because he's the same age as Myrna pretty well. And he was, a young guy that lived in town. And
yeah, he spent his whole life there, didn't he?
Yeah, interesting. So my experience with Buff is that he was a very talkative and a teasing kind of a character. And he was our bus driver.
oh, was he?
Yes. And so I used to get a little bit of pressure from him to walk the lane. And I was getting a little bit older and he said, and he'd yell from the front because I was in the back. That was the embarrassing part, is that whatever conversation we're having is in front of everyone and it's loud. And he'd say, Eleanor, you should walk the lane today. It's good for the figure. So when your body's changing and you're becoming a teenager, the last thing you want to do is discuss these changes in front of everyone in a very loud fashion. And the other thing that was really embarrassing was that he loved to comment on whatever was hanging on the line. And I don't think anybody else had long underwear hanging on the line in the middle of summer. Right? So he'd comment about Elgin's, Gertie's got his underwear on the line. Well, again, not really what I want to talk about. So I was mortified. I have so much stress about it.
Then along came his, your teacher, Bob.
Dorothy, yes.
Dorothy. And she took him in hand and married him. And next thing you know, they bought that place at the end of the lane. And
Yeah, the Bob Neal farm.
yeah, and and so, it was, you would know them in such a different way than what I would have known them,
Well, and I
Oh.
noticed that.
I doubt if she started doing that until she got into the new house, because
I think
the
so.
the old house was not that warm sometimes.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Dad, you know I'm going to want to see that picture because you know what it does? It proves that it's not a figment of my imagination. It shows that
Okay.
it's, well, not that I ever
You
thought
will
of
have to send that one, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
was thinking of Dad. Yeah, I guess I could understand. I was out there at 7 this morning. It wasn't hot, and I was no bra. I did have a shirt on.
Well, that's great.
And I was out
See,
at home.
you're
You
the
don't
opposite of
have to
Grandma.
do it. When you don't
You have a bra on, but no shirt.
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So we should move on to the Fairburn.
Okay.
What do you think?
Okay. So do you want me to read then? And
Yeah, sure.
okay. All right. Just a bit of background here of Grandma and Grandpa Fairburn. My grandma Alice married James MacArthur in Hensel, Ontario. And that was further north, east of Lake Huron is the area where they lived. They had 4 children, one after the other: Elgin, Ken, Jesse, and Edith. But tragedy struck when James was so badly injured by a fall from an apple tree that he died, leaving her with 4 children to raise. Now, he didn't die instantly, as it tells us in that other book. And I know
Right.
that he had time to discuss what he thought she should do, because of these 4 children. They moved into town, I believe, and in a few years, Alice married a bachelor, Al Fairburn. He had land in Manitoba, and the family was moved to his farm south of Snowflake.
Right.
So Grandpa Fairburn. By the time I came into the picture, my grandparents were living on the outskirts of Snowflake. Their daughter, my Aunt Hazel, and her husband Jack Taylor lived with them. Jack had land nearby, and it seemed to work well for them. They had a little girl, Alice Ann, and later Kim and Jeff. To me, Grandpa was an old man. His job was to sit out on the veranda with his pipe and watch over little Alice Ann. They adored each other. I remember Grandpa letting us watch him get his pipe going. Quite a tricky job. He died when I was just 9 years old, and we kids had to walk past the coffin to say goodbye. I don't think we were allowed to go to the funeral. Yeah. So, and
I
my
think that's right,
grandson
yeah.
was very close to him, and she was kind of, he was her grandpa, and I don't think she didn't always want us to be, him to be our grandpa, because he was her grandpa. They spent hours and hours and hours together, so, yeah. Bob, you are so much younger.
I don't have very strong memories of him. I remember him walking around the house on the sidewalk using a cane.
Yeah.
I don't remember him going a whole lot further. Whether he went out to the garden area or not, I'm not sure. But he was quite, fairly feeble by the time I remember him.
Yeah. So anyway, Grandma Fairburn, I had more memories of her. Because these grandparents lived in the same house as Aunt Hazel and Uncle Jack, my relationship with her was different than with the Booker grandparents. She seemed older, I guess. And that was because Aunt Hazel took the lead in everything. Aunt Hazel was the gardener, and, she and Grandma worked together, but Aunt Hazel had taken over as the main housekeeper, I guess.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I knew she was a feisty little woman, very competitive about her abilities to do things well. For example, my mom told me when she swatted flies, she kept track of how many. When she went picking berries, she tried to pick her pail full the fastest. She even teased my sister, who had Elaine and Shirley 11 months apart, that she had Elgin and Ken 10 months apart. Her pies and scones were always just a bit richer and flakier than other people's. Her crocheting and embroidery was meticulously done, but I would not say she was stuck up at all. No.
No, I wouldn't say so.
Yeah. My dad would take us to Sunday school, and then he would go over to visit his parents. We kids would come over to meet him there. If we were quiet and didn't ask, Grandma would say, "Go and get my purse." She would have a peppermint for us. New Year's was spent at the Fairburn side, and Uncle Ken's would be there too. Aunt Hazel and Grandma would have a wonderful supper with some fancier things than we were used to. My dad and Aunt Hazel would play some tunes on the piano and fiddle, and once Grandpa and Grandma put on the matching pajamas the families had given them for Christmas and did a little dance. Grandma lived many years after Grandpa died and passed away in her late 80s. And I didn't go on with that. Bob, you and I both know that eventually the care, Uncle Jack realized the care was too much for Aunt Hazel, and the family arranged for her to, first of all, she lived with Mrs. Wellington in Snowflake for a while. That was Gracie Connor's grandma, Bob. And
Okay,
then eventually she moved to near Crystal City.
Okay, and before that, she stayed for a little while with Ken and Letha, but that wasn't going to work out. And then she came and stayed with our parents for a little while, and then I'd forgotten about the Wellington connection.
Yeah, Mrs. Wellington. She was Grace Connor's mother.
Right, and then you said
Grace
the
Connor's
Crystal City.
grandmother, mother. Grace Connor's mother. Yeah.
I guess so. Yeah, right.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's right. Because she remarried. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So there was a progression there, but until such time as she moved away from Jack and Hazel's, we always had kind of the same memory of her. We'd go in there and she'd be, at least if it was in the heating season, she'd be sitting at the foot of the stairs that went to the upstairs, which was where the big square register was. And she'd be sitting right on the register, soaking up all the heat from the furnace.
Yes.
She was, or she'd be backed up to the kitchen stove when that was on.
Yeah. So were you ever in that house? Were you ever in the house, Taylor's house at Snowflake, Eleanor?
Oh, yes.
Aunt Hazel's house.
Mhm.
Okay. So in the early days, before there was, electricity and stuff, you remember how you come in the back door and the sink was there, and then into the kitchen, and there was a table and the stove and fridge. Like this is what in your days, I guess. But they were not built-in cupboards in the kitchen. Like it wasn't.
No, there weren't. No.
And then there was that little pantry, dark kind of pantry with all those cupboards, where Aunt Hazel would just make the most amazing things in there. Well, I think the baking was done sometimes on the kitchen table, but like as far as finding wonderful things to put into sandwiches and stuff, it just would miraculously come out of that little hole wall.
And it was arranged so that it could serve either the kitchen area or the dining area.
Oh, right. There was a door, right?
Doors for each place, yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. And of course, in those days, they all had to have a big dining room table, a dining room, and theirs was into the living room too, And of course, in the early days, there was no TV, but.
The living room was quite a bit smaller.
Mm-hmm.
The last time one of the last times I saw Aunt Hazel, because I would have been out for something, she was making English muffins in her kitchen. And she maybe commented that the floor might have been a little bit slippery because there would have been a little bit of that cornmeal that she would use for
right.
English muffins. But she had 3 or 4 frying pans going. And, when I think about how you're describing it, people may do back then with whatever they had, but you would have to think, how could she make such wonderful, like that's one of the things Aunt Hazel is really known for, is just maybe she was a great cook too, but she was a fantastic baker.
Baking, the baking was
just... And I remember that little weird, crowded little hallway pantry thing. But I wouldn't have remembered about cupboards not being built in. But I envision that during your story, Dad, that you shared during the United Church video about how Grandma Fairburn had asked about your situation within the first week of marriage there.
And I don't know whether this is the place or not, but talking about going to Hazel and Jack's and Grandma Fairburn's, just after Colleen and I were married, we just got back from our honeymoon about a week, and we had gone to church, and same thing was happening. We went there after church, and we just barely got in the door, and poor little old grandma was sitting there on the chair over by the stove, and she looked up at me and she said, "Is she any good in bed?" And just imagine how you would feel when you're just newly married and some old lady asks you a question like that. I think there was some stumbling and stammering going on.
Why? Well, Auntie, you like to use the word feisty when people are acting like that. So,
She
she
liked to tell an off-color joke, a little bit,
Yeah.
a story, and that sort of thing.
she
Yeah,
seemed quite spunky,
yeah.
from what I could hear. But so was she also a really good baker? Like, was Aunt Hazel sort of,
Oh, yeah,
like
yeah.
her mom?
Yeah, like I said, Grandma Booker's was more like if you were comparing, say, a pie crust or a biscuit or something. Grandma's she had stuff to feed a whole bunch of people,
Yeah.
and it was plain cooking, good plain
Right.
cooking. But Grandma Fairbairn's and Aunt Hazel's was always just a little, they made scones. We called them scones. People now call them scones, but we called them scones, and
Right.
fancy things that were just a little richer than
Mm-hmm.
than often. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And I would have preferred to have had Grandma Fairbairn's oatmeal squares, which basically had no flour in them, oatmeal, brown sugar, and butter. And to this day, I love them. They're just as rich as they can be.
Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm.
As a kid, that's what I loved. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, that's okay. There was lots of things Mom made that I didn't appreciate then that I appreciate now.
And those houses were so different then than they are now. Everything now is very open concept. Those were kind of choppy and had definite rooms and
Yeah.
things like that. So, we've talked about the Fairburns a little bit more during the United Church video, and Alice Ann had, produced a couple of photos that were really helpful. Because I think I think you guys, Dad included, were having some trouble producing some pictures for me.
Mm-hmm.
But that was a really cute picture of them with little Alice Ann.
Yes.
It was kind of a nice way to see what they were like.
Yes.
But, that whole, his name being Elliot, and it was Al for short, and how their plaque ended up on the cross. That was all the connection on that subject.
Yes. Yes, that's right. We did tell a little bit more about them on that.
Right.
I'd forgotten about that. Yeah.
So the one at the top says, "In memory of Mr. and Mrs. Elliot Fairburn from their family."
Right.
That's
Elliot Fairburn is the gentleman who married Grandma Fairburn after her husband, Jim MacArthur, was killed by falling out of an apple tree. And he married her and moved the family to Manitoba. And they lived in the house they first lived in the house where Ken and Letha were, and then they retired to the place where you would remember Hazel and Jack Taylor were.
Yeah. And he was Hazel's dad.
He was, yeah. He was known as Al Fairburn, even though his name was Elliot.
Ah. And so that was the fellow that Grandma Fairburn said, "Why, Al, I voted in favor of it." His real name was Elliot.
Right.
Couple that we knew as our Grandpa and Grandma Fairburn, as we never thought of them as being step grandpa, right, Bob?
Right. No,
we never thought of them that.
Never thought of him that way, no.
Yeah.
And Aunt Hazel was the only child that they had together.
Right.
Yeah.
So for the grandparents, they were older. So you had little time with Al, and you had more time with Alice.
Yes.
Yeah.
She was about the same age as the Booker grandparents.
Yes. And he was quite a bit older than her.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So is there anything else you want to share about what you remember about what they were like?
We didn't get to know that much about the day-to-day things. When we were there, Grandma wasn't overly talkative, I don't think. She kind of just fit in with what else was going on.
Yeah. Yeah, by this time she was she was a lot older. Well, look at me. I'm probably as old as she was when she died now, but it was a little different situation because she was not the main person in the house anymore. So,
Right.
and those days people, well, they didn't have the conveniences that we have now either. Eventually they got a bathroom upstairs in that old house, but before that, well, it was chamber pots and
Right.
washing up in water that you brought upstairs in a container, and it's
Now, am I right in remembering that eventually they did put a partial bathroom in the what was the pantry area in that house on the main floor?
no, I don't think so.
Don't think so. Okay.
I don't think so. I think it was always the bathroom. Eventually, there was a room designated as a bathroom, but they didn't have running water. And then eventually,
Right.
this was after, well, not when I was a little kid, but they did get a bathroom upstairs. So,
Right. Mhm.
so I guess that got to the point in the care for somebody in a house like that didn't get around well. It was just too much, so
Yeah. Mhm.
Well, and she would have had to overcome some difficulties in her life too, losing her husband with 4 small children.
oh yes.
And then having to, so both grandparents originated from Ontario and moved and settled at Snowflake. So they kind of have that in common.
Yeah, at different parts of Ontario, really,
Yeah.
it's quite a
Right.
large, yeah. I just think from both sides of the family, we were very fortunate to have people with strong family and community spirit and roots. And, to me, that's something I've carried with me my whole life. And I'm not saying that I've been necessarily able to, be the same way, but yeah, it's something that's inside you. And if I have to think of somebody, I don't want to think of them necessarily in heaven up there with, whatever heaven is. I just want to take with me what they were like as good people, worked hard and cared for their families, and yeah.
Yeah. We
Loved us.
didn't doubt their what would you say their fairness or anything about that. They were solid people, and we just figured they knew what they were doing and they're doing the best they could.
And they loved us unconditionally. That was the other thing too,
Yeah.
It was, yeah.
It sounds like they were both a good example of a good marriage and what
Yeah.
that looks like for people
Yeah.
coming up and looking to what examples they have.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure they had their, obviously we see them through children's eyes, but I'm sure they had their ups and downs and they weren't always perfect people, but
Yeah.
they were, yeah.
And the Al and Alice then are also buried at the Snowflake Cemetery.
Yes.
Okay.
And they're all very close together there too. Like it's,
Okay.
George and Elsie Booker wedding picture.
Yes.
oh yeah. Yeah.
Married December 25th, 1901.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what I have is the 60-year picture.
So that's at the hall, Bob.
It would be now. They're both wearing corsages.
Yeah.
I can't see anything about the background, but
But that's in the hall in Snowflake. Yeah.
I imagine it would be. Yeah.
And your caption, Auntie, says still in love.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Okay, next picture is Gertie and Elgin's wedding picture,
Right. Mm-hmm.
1925.
Right.
Yes.
Okay, the next one is the 50th anniversary at Bowden's, Christmas Day, 1951.
Right. Mm-hmm.
It also shows Myrna's shower. Do you have anything you want to say about that page, Auntie or Dad?
Well, I don't know. I was 13 years old, I guess, and thought it was pretty exciting. I'm still was a little bit mad at my sister because she hadn't asked me to be bridesmaid, but I found out about that later on, the reason for it. So it was, they were making their own, she had us made her own suit, and Yvonne made her suit, and she just didn't want to put mom and dad to any more expense and that. So anyway, that's the way it was. So
Looking at that picture, there's the 3 pictures on the one page, and the most serene couple I've ever known is underneath the one at the right
yeah,
side.
that's what I know. That's what I had said. I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you look in the left picture, if you're able to see it, I believe that's Clarence at the very right side of the picture where they're cutting the cake.
Mhm.
Oh, okay. I'll have to look at them afterwards. Yeah.
Yeah, right.
And then I think
Okay.
beside him is Mary, and I want to guess that beside Mary is Jack.
Okay, just a second here till I get a little larger.
Is
Zoom
that
in.
at Bowden's? Is that the one at Bowden's?
That's Albert.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, next picture. It says cousins with Aunt Winnie. I am the baby in the top one, and Myrna and Mary at the
Oh, yeah.
bottom with the baby cradle.
Yeah. Yeah, that was
Okay.
that would be one of the summer gatherings that we had out at the farm, at the Snowflake Farm, Grandma and Grandpa's farm. Nice. The yard was a nice size, big enough for us to all spread out, and like I said, it was fenced in, so you didn't have to worry about kids running away or anything.
So next one is Mud and Mary.
Oh, it was always mud at the farm. Yeah. Yeah, and I was plastered.
Yeah. The next one is A Good Year, which is a picture of Myrna and Mary with a giant watermelon. And it looks like a nice shot of an outhouse in the background.
Probably. I noticed
does, yeah.
there were hardly any trees had grown up there. It's not the one where it's quite bare, or no?
No, well, there's lots of foliage, but maybe not all the
Okay.
tall trees
Okay.
in that picture.
I may be thinking of a different picture then.
Yeah.
So would this be at the Booker farm?
With the watermelon?
Yeah.
Yes.
I didn't think so. I thought it was at our farm, but I don't know.
I hope that watermelon was as good as it looks.
Doesn't
Next
matter.
one is dressed for Sunday school, not looking impressed, in front of the garden gate.
Oh, yeah. Probably the sun was shining in our eyes too. That's probably the reason.
Okay, next one is summer of 42, just before the boys went overseas.
Right. Uh-huh.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was a big day as a little kid, and just see the glamour of them in their outfits, and didn't really know the horror that they might be facing.
And of course, that was a little bit before I would be able to remember.
Yes, it was.
When they came back, I remember that. But,
Right.
okay, I'm on to the next one.
Okay, the next one is Uncle Wilbur and Uncle Jack with a harvest of pumpkins, and Myrna and Mary MacArthur, Jean and Doreen Booker on the ends. Rita is missing. I'm not sure what the occasion was, but little dresses.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
For the carriage.
Yeah, so there's a carriage at the top, and then a little arrow pointing to, I believe, Mary, and it says Booker, Hillman's, MacArthur.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Next one is Bob and Mary. Bob is 1.5 years old. I've seen this cute little picture before.
Yeah.
The next one is Myrna could drive us to Sunday school with the cutter.
Yes.
And that same old cutter went all through the years.
Huh.
And for a long time, it was, after we quit using it, it was stored in the old shop, the one that eventually burnt down. But before it got that far, we took it out of there, and I guess it just sat outside. I don't know whether people played in it or what, but anyway, we needed the shop space, so it got taken out of there.
Yeah.
Interesting. The next one is Magic Baking Powder Can of Saved Seeds. And I'm not
right.
sure what you have, Dad, but Mary's holding the can.
Right. Well, I've got the hole over my shoulder, and it looks like it's a hand, like
Yeah.
attached to my hat.
Yeah.
The next one is Bob's first day of school in 1948, Mary grade 6. Of course, I've seen this picture before too.
Yes. Yes.
Right.
Very cute. You've got your little lunch pails, I see.
Yeah.
Next one is Mary with braids standing with Grandpa, and Dad has a little suit on.
And a
Yes.
checkered tie, yeah.
Yeah.
And you see, I
So-
wouldn't remember Grandpa like that a lot because for me, Grandpa was an older guy because I was
Right.
one of the youngest, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like that kind of picture. And then the next one is, boy, Dad, you sure look excited about your new bike.
Oh, yes, yes.
And I remember that bike. That was a very smooth riding bike.
Yeah, CCM.
Yeah. Looks like you just got the best gift ever in that one.
That was my 10th birthday.
Oh my gosh. So that was on your birthday.
Yeah.
That's so cute. Okay, next one. Notice my new hairdo. I was 12 or 13. Marilyn Cheryl Booker. And then maybe there's
Right.
more listing, but it got cut off.
Oh, yeah, okay.
That's a good one. Okay, next one. MacArthur Fairburn siblings. Jesse, 53. Elgin, 56. Hazel, 42. Ken, 55. Edith, 52. And they're getting a picture with Grandma.
Right. Uh-huh.
That's Grandma Fairburn.
Yeah.
Yeah. The picture was taken on August of 1954, it says on the side of the picture.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, look at Aunt Hazel. Okay, that's a cute picture. The next one is Pea Pickers. Carol Hillman, Mary Mom, and Auntie Violet. What a crew. August of 1954. That's a great picture. I love those kind of pictures.
So I assume these are pictures that I took pictures of with my phone and sent them to you, are they?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
I had them previously. This is a good one. I don't know how old you are, a teenager. And I can picture exactly where that is on the farm. That's Dad and then Grandma and Grandpa standing there.
Yeah, and 10 years later, there would have been a house straight behind us.
Yes, and I see the height of those trees.
Right, yeah.
Okay, next one. Elaine is 11 months. Shirley is a newborn. And then there's Dad and Grandma sitting on the lawn. We met in Morden to return Elaine.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Next picture, Aunt Mary is a beautiful Aunt Mary standing in her grad dress in front of the new farmhouse, 1956.
Okay.
Yeah, and that was for the normal school grad. Mm-hmm.
And you made your grad dress.
Which one? Is that the blue one?
No, well, this is a not color picture. It looks like a light color.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So next one is, that might be your blue one. Grade 12, 1955. It looks chiffon-like.
Oh, it was kind of a rusty color. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a black and white picture.
It had been Faye Hillman's, and I got it changed a little bit at the neck.
Well, you're making it look good there, Auntie. Next one is the fall summer I started normal. Age 18, 1955. It's a picture of... Oh, that is you, Aunt Mary. I thought that was Erna. Yeah.
Yeah, by a gate, I guess the garden gate probably, I don't know. Or no, the barnyard gate again. Not sure.
Yeah. The next one is in front of one of the windows of, well, am I right, Dad? Isn't this in front of one of the windows of the new farmhouse?
No, this would be
Somebody else's yard.
either Grandma and Grandpa Booker's house
Okay.
or Hillman's house. I think
So-
probably Grandpa and Grandma Booker's house, I think.
So it says Gertie, Bob, Grandma and Grandpa Booker, Uncle Bill,
Yes,
Auntie
that's
Vi.
That's in Snowflake. Yeah, that's Snowflake.
Yeah, right.
Interesting. Auntie Vi and Greg Booker. Look at Greg, is tiny little boy in this picture. Isn't that funny?
Yeah, right.
Okay, the next one. Oh, is it just a good picture of Uncle Gordon? He looks like he's eating something.
Watermelon, maybe? Or
Yeah, it almost looked like he was playing a harmonica there for a minute, but I think he's eating something. Yeah, that's good. Oh, and Mary, aren't you cute at the field meet?
Oh,
Oh, and then
jumping. Is that where I'm jumping over a high jump or something?
no, you're just standing by a fence talking to Aunt Irma, it looks like.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And then you and Gordon, casual picture. The next one is the big four. Looks like some girlfriends.
That was at Snowflake, grade 11. Yeah.
Okay, so the Zoom call timed out, so now it's just me. This is a picture of all the kiddos together. And I'll read the names for you. So the back, left to right, is Vern, Albert, Violet, Leslie, and Gertie. And front, left to right, is Jack, Wilbur, Florence, Eldon, Clarence, and Roy. This picture was taken in front of the old house on the farm before the new farmhouse, their dream house, was built. And, there's a few familiar faces in there. I see Grandma and Grandpa to the very back, Aunt Myrna, Bob. Everybody's holding kitties, it looks like. And interestingly enough, the details I got was this was a gathering at the farm for some teachers, and you can see right in there a very young picture of Dorothy Gore, was Dad's grade 2 teacher, and she met up with Buff, and they got together, and then they lived at the end of our lane with that dairy farm, and Buff was our spirited bus driver, of course. Here's a picture, a Christmas gathering, which is quite a large gathering. Looks like another gathering. If you go around, you can see, I maybe wouldn't know everyone. Look at how cute Gail is. My God, look at her cute little curls. Probably some kind of reunion, maybe, I'm guessing. They used to have these gatherings and get-togethers. I haven't been to anything like that in forever. Nice picture. And then this was when they were all together as adults, and they're all lined up there in a row. And then they have a picture of them with their spouses. And that's great Grandma and Grandpa Booker at their 60th wedding anniversary. And here's one. I thought there was only one picture in the slides with Rob and Grandma and Grandpa Booker, but here's Grandma Booker, and sure enough, she's got Rob on her knee. Cute. Then Dad provided me with some pictures. This is Grandma and Grandpa Booker with their great-grandson, baby Rob. The next is 4 generations on the other side. So we've got Grandma Alice Fairbrun in the middle. She's holding Rob. And then we've got Bob on the left and Grandpa on the right. Man, 4 generations. Okay, so here's the siblings of Grandpa. And I really remember them a lot like this. You know, this is how I remember them looking. So the children of Alice Fairbrun, we've got Hazel Taylor, Jessie McTaggart, Edith McLennigan, Ken MacArthur, and Elgin MacArthur. And then we have similar idea, but with their spouses. So we've got Elgin and Gertie MacArthur, Hazel and Jack Taylor, Jessie and Bill McTaggart, Edith and George McLennigan, Ken and Letha MacArthur. And Jack Taylor was taking the picture. Interesting here, this is a young picture of Elgin's father, James MacArthur. And look at this cute little picture of brothers Ken and Elgin. Obviously sitting on some bales somewhere. Super cute picture. Thanks so much for sharing these pictures, Dad and Aunt Mary. Really helps us to go through them together and take a closer look at things. There's a lot of pictures here I've never seen before, so I really enjoyed that. Super interesting. Okay, this is Gertie's memories that Aunt Mary was talking about in the Zoom call. And the first paragraph was written by Aunt Mary. Faye McCannell was going through her own family history files when she found this 16-page story written by her Aunt Gertie, my mom, in 1986. Her lovely penmanship never varied, and it brought a tear to my eye, remembering all the letters she had written over the years. My dear cousin Faye sent it to me, and I decided to type it up for others to read. So here goes, Gertie's memories. These are some of the things I can remember about my life. I was born January 22nd, 1903, at the farm home. Aunt Mary Jane Finley was the midwife, and she stayed with Mother until she was up. Mother named me Jessie Gertrude, Jessie after Dad's mother, and Gertrude after her school friend, Gertie Bilger. I can't remember too much of my early childhood. Mother told of how she went to the barn to get the horse and buggy to go to town and left me in the house. And when she came to get me, I had her hat ladled full of buttermilk. When I was 3 and Leslie 1 year, Dad sent Mother, Leslie, and me to Dunnville, Ontario to see her folks and relatives and friends. They thought she came out with Dad to this terrible West. They would never see her again. The two things that stand out in my mind about that trip was Aunt Winnie, who was 11 at the time, dressing me up in her clothes like a lady, and us going to Buffalo to visit Uncle Albert and Aunt Emma. Aunt Emma would carry me to the sideboard, and I could have as many bananas as I liked. When Violet was a baby, she was so good. Mother would take her to the garden in a basket, out by the west trees, and I would watch her while they planted the seeds. We all had to help with work as soon as we were old enough or before. Leslie and I would put down hay and straw for Dad, and I can still remember how cold we got. We also had to turn the fanning mill to clean the grain for seed. I was 7 years old when I started to Starmount School. Dad took me in the winter, but when he got busy in the spring, I walked at least 2 miles. The teacher said that I was so tired, when I got to school, I would lay my head on the desk and go to sleep. It was understood that if the weather was bad, I would go home with the teacher. I think Leslie only went to Starmount 1 year when Dad got our land put in the Snowflake Consolidated School District, and horse-drawn vans picked us up at the end of our lane. Mr. Moore was our van driver. Until the new school was finished in 1912, we attended the old school, and the larger pupils had school in the annex of the church. We used to have school gardens, and in the fall had a school fair, which was a big thing. I can remember putting in vegetables, canned fruit, and baking, and got some prizes. I can just remember the new Methodist church being built in 1906. Dad was one of the founders and on the church board for many years. Also was superintendent of Sunday school for 38 years. We always went to Sunday school in the morning. Church was at 7 p.m. One of my first recollections is getting dressed for Sunday school was when Mother was combing our hair and found we all had lice, so no Sunday school that day. It was found that the Harvest hired men had brought lice in with them, and then Mary made this note, I think they used coal oil to kill the lice. In the fall of 1917, Violet had pneumonia and nearly lost her life. We had a nurse sitting with her and kept the window wide open. When she finally pulled through, Mother thought it would do her good to take a trip to Ontario, so Mother took Leslie, Violet, Roy, and baby Eldon to Grandpa and Grandma Dawn's. Dad and I kept Albert, Vern, and Clarence. We canned beef, and I did washing with a tub and washboard and stomper. As I was pouring water from the boiler into the tub, it slipped and the whole kitchen was covered with water. Clarence still remembers the terrible mess. Luckily, I didn't get burned. I was 14 when they went to Ontario and turned 15 in January. I stayed home that year to help Mother and took grade 9 the next year. Mother needed me, so I couldn't further my education. I painted the top buggy and Democrat and helped Dad paint the house. I enjoyed riding horseback and hauling grain in threshing time. In 1920, when I was 18, the covered skating rink was built, and we enjoyed getting to skate twice a week and socializing with friends. I dressed in several carnivals. The next summer, Elgin asked me to go to a sports day in Pilot Mound. Ken and Letha went with us in Grandpa Fairbairn's new car. That was the start of our courtship. We went together for 4.5 years and finally found a farm we could buy. We were married quietly at home, November 12, 1925. Reverend John Linton married us, and Violet and Ken stood up with us while Letha played the wedding music. There was a dance in the old hall in our honor that night. We spent the night in our farm home, and the next morning we took the train for Winnipeg for a week's holiday. We lived a quiet life and worked hard, but found time to go to dances. I skated, Elgin curled, played ball and hockey. Myrna was born June 13, 1930, as we came through the grasshopper plague and the dirty 30s. Mary was born June 27, 1937. The children's clothes were made from hand-me-downs. The pool elevator was built in 1928. Elgin was the first secretary and held that office for 20 years. In 1927, Elgin was put on the church board. He became secretary-treasurer in 1935 and held that office for 48 years. In 1948, he gave up being secretary for the pool and took on secretary-treasurer for the Snowflake Consolidated School District for 23 years, at which time the division board took over. Bob was born April 27, 1942. He was a good child and has been a joy to us all through his life. When Bob was 1.5 years old, Violet kept him and we had a weekend at True Butler's at Grand Forks, which we enjoyed very much. We took Myrna and Mary with us. Clarence looked after our home for us. In the late fall of 1946, we had our first real holiday. We motored to Indian Head to visit Leslie and Mary Booker and girls on the farm, and then to Wilkie, Saskatchewan to visit George and Edith McLennigan and their children Doug and Eleanor. We took Bob 4 years and Mary 9 years. They loved it, especially eating in a restaurant. The next summer, we sent Myrna to have a holiday with McLennigans at Waskesiu Lake. Mother and Dad moved into town at that time, and Wilbur and Lillian moved into their farmhouse. Myrna took grade 12 at United College and next year taught on permit at Glendenning School near Killarney. She boarded with the Frank family. The next winter, she worked at a restaurant at the Sugar Beet Factory in Winnipeg where she met George McClelland. They were married January 20th, 1951. In the summer of 1950, we got our first car, a metallic gray and a very good car. The fall of 1953, Elgin had back trouble and couldn't work, so Myrna came home with babies, Elaine and Shirley, and stayed with Bob to let us take Grandma Fairburn to Hensel and Toronto. We left September 26th and got home October 15th. We had a wonderful time. Grandma kept well and enjoyed it all. Elgin hadn't been back to his hometown since he came to Manitoba at age 16 in 1914. Mary took normal training in Winnipeg and taught at Roland for 1 year. She married Gordon McNabb. We made quite a few trips to visit them in Ojima, Spears, and Oxbow, Saskatchewan. In 1960, we motored to visit Edith and George, who had by this time moved to Edmonton. In 1966, we went again, and they took us on a trip with them to the mountains. We camped in their tent trailer and went as far west as Salmonar. We had a wonderful time. Then, in 1969, we flew to Edmonton and went camping with them again. This time, we went to Vancouver, visited Clarence, and then on to the island. There we visited with Joyce Saunders McTaggart and took in most everything, including Bouchard Gardens. In 1967, we went to Expo. We went direct to Ottawa and stayed with Morris and Jesse Smith. We went by bus to Montreal and took in 2 days of Expo, which was wonderful. We then visited Elgin's relatives in Hensel and London and Lynn Ari in Guelph. Next, we went to Toronto to visit Aunt Winnie and Milton and Helen Boyle. We came back by Kapuskasing to Eldon and Nellie's. Elaine and Shirley were there waiting to get a ride home with us. We were gone 3 weeks. In the fall of 1970, we got a pretty blue new Ford car. Myrna and George drove it and took us to visit George's cousins, Genevieve Sprague and husband in the United States, and then on to Middleton to visit Uncle Vern Don. We came home by Windsor, Ontario. Alice Ann and Rick had a 45th anniversary meal for us. From there, we visited the Hensel relatives, then to Toronto to Aunt Wynne and John Jackson's. Also Helen and Milton Boyle. We took in some of the royal fare. In 1971, Myrna and George took us to Calgary. We took the bus to Edmonton and had another good visit with the McLenagans. Mary wonders where Myrna and George were going this time. In 1972, Mary Booker died and was buried at Indian Head. Leslie wanted us to drive to Florida with him. We stayed with him for 3 weeks and then to Uncle Vern's at Middleton for a few days. In November of the same year, we went to Toronto to visit Kay and Bob Brost and Aunt Wynne. From 72 to 82, we visited Aunt Wynne 6 times. In 1974, I went with Violet, Florence, and Bill on a 20-day bus tour of the southern United States, which was very enjoyable and educational. In January 1976, we went to Edmonton to help Edith and George celebrate their 50th wedding anniversary. Again in January 1981, we were at their 55th. In spring of 1987, we visited Vancouver and Edmonton. We stayed with Wayne and Louise for 6 nights and visited Leslie and Grace and Mr. and Mrs. Solveson, Louise's parents, from there. During our 4 days in Edmonton, we stayed with Eleanor and Harvey Grunberg. She saw to it that we had several visits with George and Edith, who are now living in a care home. Doug and Ellen had us to their home along with the parents. Doug drove 150 miles to come home so we could visit with us, and we appreciated that very much. Since we were there, George and Edith have sold their home and divided the contents among the families. After Bob finished grade 12, he took a 2-year agriculture course at the University of Manitoba. He then helped at home and soon bought some of the land and raised cattle. On January 26, 1963, Bob and Colleen White were married in Pilot Mound. They lived with us until November of the same year, when we had a new bungalow moved in for them. Wayne was born November 6, 1963, and in due time, Lynn, Karen, and Eleanor came along. We enjoyed our grandchildren, and as Colleen taught piano lessons, I did my share of babysitting until Eleanor came, and that made it too many for us. Over the years, I enjoyed working with the Ladies' Aid and Women's Missionary Society, later combined to make the UCW. I was president for 10 years, secretary-treasurer for 8, and later supply secretary, and finally friendship secretary. I did not know that. Elgin and I enjoyed our involvement with the Snowflake United Church. In 1965, on November 12th, we were surprised to have the family come in the evening to help us celebrate our 40th wedding anniversary. In 1975, we had a dinner in the church basement, followed by a come-and-go tea, and later a dance held in the Snowflake Hall to celebrate 50 years of marriage. In 1980, the family held a surprise dinner at Stewart's Restaurant in Manitou to honor us on our 55th. 5 years later, but in the summer, we had a reception and supper held at the new curling rink at Snowflake. It was 60 years for us, 40 for Eldon and Nellie, and Wilbur and Lillian. And Mary wrote, it also served as a farewell from the community for Mom and Dad who were moving to Morden. On August 7th, 1985, we moved into a new duplex in Morden, which we think is a good move. We have made new friends and adjusted quite well. In this segment, I'd like to talk a little bit about keepsakes. But first, I just wanted to tell you, it has been a very social week here for us in April. First, Karen and Scott came out from Winnipeg, so we had a really good visit with them. It's always great to see them. And Karen and I have a very special bond, so whenever I get some time with Karen, everybody just knows, look out, those two are together. So that's still true. And then a couple of days later, Cheryl Lyon came through, and really that was wonderful. We hadn't seen each other in a while, and it was long overdue to get caught up, so really enjoyed that. And then we went to Airdrie, to our favorite lunch spot with Dad and Barb, which we hadn't done since Christmas, and now that this weather is over, we'd probably be doing that a little bit more often. And then yesterday was our 30th wedding anniversary. So yeah, that's crazy to think that we've been married that long. Time sure flies. And then tonight is the Jesse Cook concert, so I am just beside myself. I'm so excited about going to that. So we are, again, I keep saying this, third row center. We just couldn't have gotten better seats. I'm just can't wait. One of the things I wanted to mention about when Cheryl was here was we were talking about this desk, or what she used as a makeup dresser. She was telling me came from Uncle Vern's place. So I don't know if she got it from a garage sale or an auction or some type of thing, but she believes it belonged to my great grandma and grandpa Booker. So she's trying to get this table to me. She wants me to have it, and it probably needs some refinishing or something like that, but I'm quite interested to see what that is about. So this is a picture of something that looks quite a bit like what she's trying to give me, but it's not the exact table. The other thing we talked about was Grandma MacArthur's reputation of always welcoming people to the community and bringing them baking and sometimes flowers. And Cheryl said that when she moved to Snowflake, when they moved there, sure enough, our grandma was the first, one of the first on the scene, and she even remembered what she brought her. She brought her a bouquet of gladiolas and some wonderful muffins. So I had a package ready to send back with Cheryl to when she was going to Tyler's. So in the little bag there was some jam and jelly and some of those date drop cookies that I make. What else was in there? Well, I gave quite a bit of cookies. Anyway, I don't remember what else was in there, but I said, I got to send this care package because that's being just like Grandma. So we called it Gertie to go. So if you're going to send baking home with someone, feel free to call it Gertie to go if you want. It makes you feel good knowing that you did something like Grandma did. So when we talk about keepsakes, which really didn't need to be part of this video, but this video subject just keeps growing when it comes to grandparents. It always makes me think of something else, and maybe I want to include it. I really wonder if when people, our loved ones, we lose them and they leave things behind for us, I often wonder if they really know how much those things mean to us. If you love the person, you probably really love the item that they left you. So I don't have that many things, like compared to my dad, who really, being the only boy, he really had a house full of things. And when Mom passed away and a little bit of time passed and I went to help him clean out some items in the house, it was really an emotional day, and it would have been anyway, but Dad was dealing with a lot of items that had meaning. This item had a story, this item had a story, and I was like, my goodness, it's exhausting because I couldn't really relate. I didn't have that many items. But Dad was really committed to being mindful about giving them to people that would appreciate them, put them into different piles, and he drove to the end of the earth to get these items to people, and he really took it seriously. And I'm sure that that's appreciated by all of us that were on the receiving end. When you look at what Rob and Karen are sharing, which are bigger items, I just wanted to point out that those didn't come directly from Grandma and Grandpa's house. Those came from Dad. So when he was moving out of the house in Cochrane, he had to decide what to do with some of these bigger items. So I don't think Mona would mind if I share. She had taken some pictures of Grandma's china, which she has, which is beautiful. So I wanted to include some pictures that Mona shared, and I saved them, and it's a really beautiful pattern. Probably something that Mona really enjoys having and reminds her of Grandma and Grandpa. And one day I posted on Facebook that I had made Grandma's chili sauce, and on the same day, Bonnie put a picture of her pickles. She had just made Grandma MacArthur's easy, I think they're called easy something or simple pickles, the same recipe that Aunt Mary makes. And she posted it on the same day, and I wrote, "Oh, Bonnie, we have a very proud grandma today that you made pickles and I made chili sauce." Thanks to my Auntie Mary sharing the recipe with me, and she still makes it herself. This is my first time. And look at my cute little labels. Oh, Grandma, what a sweetheart. Oh, Grammy. She made the best chili sauce too. I can't wait to try it. And I make the date drop cookies that I had adapted to raspberry regularly. And Dad and Aunt Mary said that Grandma made them regularly because Grandpa loved dates so much. And, you know, I really would want to know, does she make them more than I do? So.
They're very good.
Mhm.
After all this time in my freezer.
Yeah, and chewy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You're in this video, you guys don't know yet, but I'm showing how I make them.
I think these might even be better than Mom's were.
Wow. Well, I think Grandma would be kind of smitten that I'm making these today, maybe.
You know, she wouldn't be upset that I said that because she'd just be thrilled to know that you were carrying on the tradition.
Mm-hmm. I think Grandpa wouldn't say a word because he doesn't talk when he's eating. So, and when I'm measuring the ingredients for those cookies, I always think how many times Grandma and Mom made them too, measured the same ingredients. But it's hard to put your finger on all the things that remind you of someone. It could be a smell, it could be a song, a recipe, a taste, a picture. You know, there's just so many things that can cause us and trigger us to remember someone. So those memories are really nice. And for me, they're a daily thing. And when I bake bread, and like there's nothing that smells like baked bread, you know, that reminds me of, you know, Mom baking bread, because that was a wonderful smell. You know what occurs to me though is that a bad smell or a perceived bad smell can bring back memories too. I wonder what she means by that.
Yeah.
You kind of kill me on some of your notes here. You put,
I put like crazy.
you put, can I share? You put, you talk about softening the celery and the onions and so on, blah, blah. Once again, simmer until your house is completely pickled. My kids hate the smell and will not eat it.
That's right.
You said this makes about 6 pints, but I usually make half because I use the smaller jars, which I would as well. Because I don't have real tomatoes, I can whip up a batch anytime. I love it with just about any meal. My kids are crazy.
That's right.
So what do you like to have it with? Like mashed potatoes, or what do you put it with?
Oh, I'll eat it with anything, any kind of meat or mashed potatoes, definitely with scalloped potatoes. You have to have scalloped potatoes, yeah.
Interesting. Well, I'm really dying to try it. You're scaring me on how much it's going to make our house smell, but I don't think I mind the smell of it.
No, I don't see why you would, but anyway, as I said, my kids are crazy.
Well, I think maybe they are too, but maybe they just don't, who knows? Maybe for us, the taste is all wrapped up in memories of when we were having it and who we were having it with.
That could be. And, you know, Mom made it in quart sealers. That's how much Dad ate of it.
Wow.
Literally, she would have, she'd make quarts of it.
So I hope you enjoy this segment. There's a lot of interesting things to see. And I'm sure that you all have keepsakes that belong to special people in your life. So let's take a look.
Okay, Eleanor, at your request, here is some of the things that I have from the farm. These are things or items that most people will be able to relate to. as they got to see them more than anything else, like Grandpa's tools or anything like that. You'll see the lamp from his desk, some of his church stuff, the lamp that he and Dad converted from gas to electric, the family clock, Grandma's bread pan, the kitchen table and chairs, and over here, some of his clothing, his curling sweater, his pool sweaters, the hat that he wore to the snowflake reunion, a couple of his smocks from working outside in the shop. I think there's even one of Grandma's hairnet things hanging there. So anyway, this is a lot of the things that people will be able to identify from the farmhouse, and I hope that it brings fond memories.
We're playing hide and seek.
This is the original tickle trunk that I thought up out of my own head and actually made. And it's got about, I'd say at least 8 coats of paint, very, very thickly painted. And at one point the top cracked, so I had to repair it.
The tickle trunk was this magical, like Pandora's box. The anticipation of what's gonna happen.
That's what I liked, was the idea that you open something, a box, and inside of it are all these things, and you can take these things like a wig and a hat and a spoon and a pair of boots, and you can make another human being. And I thought that was fascinating.
How's that?
Oh, would you like to see another hat in here? I almost was going to wear this one. Really quite an interesting one, and a very fancy one. This is a sombrero. Came from Mexico, and I decorated it a little bit. I've got something else from Mexico that goes with it, too, something to wear. It's very, very pretty. It's almost like a vest. Just slip it on like this. Doesn't have any buttons. Pretty neat looking. See? So I can sort of dance around. It's nice to whirl in a hat like this.
Okay, so this is Lynn's little tickle trunk that Grandpa made for her, and I'm going to see if I can find the entry in Grandma's diary. That's how I found out that this tickle trunk belonged to Lynn. I never knew the story until I was doing the video on the Christmas diaries, and I read it. And so Dad told me that Grandpa made this tickle trunk out of an old harpsichord. Isn't that interesting? And one of the things about this tickle trunk that I remember a lot is the way that these feel. This is like a kind of a twiny kind of stuff. And I remembered the way it felt on my fingers to put it around those. And check it out. These are the same types of things Dad was mentioning. These little pins that are the same as on the bottom of the chair that Grandpa and Dad made for Karen and I. And they're right here. And it's just a texture thing that causes a memory for me. So I've been storing stuff in here, and I just want to show you the inside. So there's more of that twiny kind of stuff there. So inside, I have a few keepsakes. So these are some books that were read to me as my favorite childhood books. So Billy Brown Makes Something Grand, The 4 Puzzled Little Puppies. This teaches about the 4 seasons. And Nancy Plays Nurse. My God, I can't. Oh, look, an old Canadian dollar. I didn't know that was in there. And this is my graduation paper. But man, that got read to me a lot of times. And then check it out. This is a Christmas stocking that Aunt Myrna made. I think she made a lot of stockings in her life, and this was mine. And then what's really funny, because this is more in line with the tickle trunk, these are clothes. So I used to like to make clothes for my lion. Can you imagine? Pretty creative. So I would, you know, make a little hole for the tail. And then I would dress up my lion. And I had this little pants with the tail, and this, I call this his little Shania Twain outfit now. And this was a little jacket that I believe there's some sort of a professional picture taken. I don't know if I was wearing this, but that's an old vest. And then I just had my graduation diploma in here, and something to do with the festival. Anyway. So this is what the inside looks like. And the hinges are a little loose. That one's good. This needs tightening. And this is getting pretty skinny. I hope that doesn't ever break. But Lynn, if you ever want your tickle trunk, I'm keeping it for you. And one day, if you ever want it, you can totally have it. And that's what it looks like. Very well constructed. And of course, the idea was popular from the show Mr. Dress Up. And that's the whole reason Lynn wanted a tickle trunk for Christmas. Okay, Lynn, I found it. 1968. December 23rd. Elgin made a doll trunk for Lynn. I cleaned the house and made dressing. That is the tickle trunk. And I also went back a ways and saw that Grandma was working on something for your dolly. It says on the December 10th, cleaned a fish, worked on Lynn's doll coat and wrote letters. And again on the 22nd. I worked on doll coat, washed floors, and coat room, went to town in the morning. So my guess is Grandma was working on a little doll coat to put in the tickle trunk for Christmas morning. It's all in here.
Hello, this is Karen Cole. I'm Bob and Colleen MacArthur's middle daughter. Eleanor wanted me to put something together to show the dining room suite that used to belong to Grandma and Grandpa MacArthur. So Elgin and Gertie, they were married on November 12th, 1925, and Dad gave me a little bit of information the other day to say that they had enough money from their wedding to buy this dining room suite. So here you can see the nice detail on the legs of the table. I have Mom's old tablecloth on here that I always use. And there's 5 chairs, and then there's the grandfather chair in the corner. And then you'll see that there's the buffet and china cabinet that used to be separate. Dad just told me the other day they used to have their own legs, both sets here, the china cabinet and the buffet. You can see all the nice detail there. This is Mom's china set, silver birch. And we have that displayed in the china cabinet just as she had. And so apparently Grandpa used to store his violin underneath the buffet, as well as Dad used to store his Meccano set. Just looking at the china cabinet as well as the dining room set from a different angle. So we have this by our front window facing the street. And you can see the table and chairs, and then the buffet and china cabinet. Another one of Mom's Avon ladies, and then Mom actually had a clock made out of one of her plates from her china set. And then you can see we have our kitchen over here. We used to have a wall there. We had that taken down. Then we have a kitchen. You can see I'm making a cake. So what we're going to do is actually that cake is going to be for Cameron. He just turned 31. And we're going to be celebrating his birthday tomorrow at just around this very same table. We used to spend a lot of good times around this table with Grandma and Grandpa and Mom and Dad, with family and friends, and now we do the same. So here we're having Cam's 31st birthday celebration around the table. And I'm going to start from left going around the table. So we've got Alex, Kayla, Cam, whose birthday. We've got Scott.
How old are you?
We've got Dana, Ewan, and Sebastian. So, happy birthday to Cam.
Grandpa Elgin MacArthur buys a radial arm saw, as remembered by his son Bob MacArthur, current owner of the saw. It was January of 1974, and the men of the Snowflake community had successfully constructed the new skating rink. It was a race against time to get the posts in the ground and the boards installed for the perimeter of the skating area so that the ice could be put in and used before the weather warmed. The old rink had been dismantled carefully, and the best lumber saved to build the 2-story waiting room inside at the west end. In the lower level would be the dressing rooms, washrooms, and storage, while the upper level would house the kitchen, viewing area, and lots of room for tables and seating. During the months leading up to Christmas, one of the local handymen, Joe Haggard, had left his radial arm saw on site to cut the lumber for the 2-level project. But in the new year, he needed it for a commitment at another location. Grandpa had never had a good power saw like that, so he decided to buy one and share the use of it for the balance of the winter. I helped him research what would be a good value, and we settled on a Craftsman 10-inch model from Sears. I made a trip into Winnipeg and brought the new saw home. It proved to be a valued tool at the rink and for many years after in the farm shop. For those of you who may not know, a table saw and a radial arm saw can both be used for many of the same tasks, and there are pros and cons to each of them. The table saw may be seen as easier to use for ripping large sheets because it cuts from the bottom and can handle larger widths. However, you always have to push the material through the saw. The radial arm pulled through the material. Very accurate cuts can be made using this technique. In this picture, the setting is to cut at a 45-degree angle as you would use for mitered corners. For either type, the working surface is limited in size. So for handling long pieces of lumber, it needs to be longer. We got around to that by building removable extensions that would also fold down easily. This picture shows the extension on the right side with the saw set in a ripping position and a piece of material ready to rip. Though it is not showing here, there is also an extension that can be added to the left side with support for longer pieces. While we still lived on the farm, the saw remained permanently set up with the extensions in place in the shop, which had been converted from a henhouse. After I moved to Portage la Prairie, I built a workshop on the end of the existing garage, and the saw stayed set up there. Even after I moved to Cochrane to my first location, I was able to keep the same setup at one side of the garage. However, at my current location, I needed to make some changes. Barb gave me a small cabinet with drawers for tool storage, and I built a solid metal frame on heavy rollers, which was a custom fit. This frame became the support for the saw, which could now be easily rolled out onto the driveway as required to keep the sawdust out of the garage. While in the garage, the extensions are removed and the saw table can be used at a working surface for assorted jobs. There is also a space at the back to use for storage of small pieces of wood that are still suitable for other projects. We don't know what the future holds for us, but as long as I have space to keep this unit on site, I will continue to enjoy using it for the many tasks that it was designed to do. This is Grandma and Grandpa's chiming clock that they bought when they moved to Morden. And I think they really enjoyed the sound of it. I really do also. I have the instructions that I have to refer to all the time whenever I want to set the chime, because I do not remember ever how it works. So I don't ever want to lose those. So maybe in a bit we'll check back and see if we can hear the clock. And I just wanted to show this sweet little napping puppy under the desk. Hi, Rocky. Are you having a little sleep? And I keep this in the office. Now up above in my kitchen, there's a row of cabinets that you can display things. So I just want to show you what's up here in this one cupboard. So that's Grandma's scale. that probably would have been great to weigh apples or potatoes. And above is Mom's recipe box. So I like to display that up there. And if we go over to my buffet hutch, this didn't belong to anyone. It's just something that I like. I just wanted to show you that I have one of Mom's little Avon ladies there. And this little one is like a Irish kind of a decorative wear that's very delicate. And that belonged to Mike's mom. And then up here, I just have a cork in there. I wanted to show Grandma's little dessert dish that's very delicate. I'm very careful when I'm handling this. I would sure not want to break it. But my understanding about this little dessert dish is that sometimes Grandpa would give money to Grandma for birthday or Christmas, and she saved it so that she could buy this to serve dessert when she was having a big Thanksgiving or Christmas dinner at the farm. And they're very elegant. So I can imagine that there was some pretty nice desserts served up in this. I don't know what the pattern is. But I really like the way this was decided, because instead of one person getting the whole set, each granddaughter got their own little dessert dish. So I really love to have this displayed up there. And like I say, I'm pretty darn careful with it. It's very beautiful. On another note, just unrelated, when I look at something like this, it really reminds me of the conveniences that we have today that the generations before us didn't have. So I recently bought this grain mill. So you put your grain berries in the hopper, and out comes fresh milled flour. And you can dial up how fine or coarse you want the flour to be. This side flattens oat groats into oatmeal. So let me show you something like that. So I got my oats here. Pour it into there, see? And then watch. They come out as fresh little flat oatmeal. Can you imagine? And then over here today, I'm making some bread. And I just want to show you that, yeah, I'm not gonna need it. Like my mom and my grandma did. I'm gonna let this machine do it. But later, my house will smell kind of like theirs did when they made fresh bread. And so that's what I'm working on today. In the entryway of our house, so I made this little Lady Diana dresser. And right above that, you can see that that's my mom's cross-stitch deer picture. And you'll see that in the background in a lot of our slides. What used to be in our living room. And it had a different frame. I reframed this. Let's get to the detail. See the little cross stitches? I love the way the light here creates a little shadow. See that? And makes the little cross stitches really pop. So this is just the perfect spot for it. And I love it because it really brings back a lot of memories for me. Oh, that was my head. So I was lucky enough to get that picture. So in the office, I just wanted to share where these paintings came from. So of course I'm talking about a different grandma here. So Grandma White was a real art lover, and she had acquired these antique-y kind of frames. See the detail? And she asked me if I could paint a couple of oil paintings, because I used to oil paint, to fit these frames. And I did that. I was able to get some canvas that could be cut, and then I painted them. And she displayed them for many years, and I'm sure she'd tell anybody who listened, my granddaughter, Eleanor Jean, painted these paintings after my grandma Jean. And then after Grandma passed, Aunt Debbie and Uncle Gary made sure that these came back full circle to me. And I really like having them, and I think this is the perfect spot for them. And I really don't display much of my oil paintings anymore, but this is the other one that I have that I did. And I don't paint anymore, but that's my other painting that I have. And then of course, this is where the clock belongs, and it'll go back there after I set the chime. All right, so we're gonna do a little window pane test. That's what you want, is there's enough gluten developed that I'm not getting a tear in the dough. We're gonna get it ready for its first proofing. It turned out really nice, I think. That's just thick. Okay, now it's gonna go in here to proof for an hour or until it doubles in size. Good to go. This is our pool table. So Dad passed this along to me. Pool tablecloth from Grandpa MacArthur. He had to replace the original after it got wet. And I think I read about that in Grandma's diary. And so I think we all remember that green, kind of feels like felt. While we're down here, this is the little table and chairs that Dad and Grandpa made for Karen and I. The Christmas of 1972 that I just featured in a video I did at Christmas time when I was reading in Grandma's diary about the Christmas diaries. So that's where I'm keeping that. And I brought this out to show you. You might remember this fuzzy little sewing trunk that belonged to Grandma MacArthur. And I always think that people would think this is ugly, you know, but I really like it. And she used to keep it in her bedroom. And I'll just get it open. What's kind of funny about this is a really slippery material. And this always reminded me of the inside of a casket. Isn't that awful? Anyway, she used to keep like her darning needles in there. And you see these little nails, they're all for holding spools of thread. And, oh, check this out. Look at this old Estee Lauder box. Look at how old that is. And inside, she would keep all of these old buttons. You know, and I was thinking about Uncle Vern and Grandpa and how many buttons and mending she must have done for them. I found a thing that has one of her, I think that's a darning needle. I wouldn't know anything about darning. So I keep this around and I keep things in it. And, you know, I really think it's cute. So I probably was the one that should have got this. Okay, so that has doubled in size. We're going to make 2 loaves of bread. Oh, that's sticky. Okay, I need to get a weight on that. 460, so I want each, 960. Half of 960 is 480, correct? Did I say 480?
Yep.
484, ooh, that's close. 475. 480. Let's see if I got 480. Pretty close, I like. Okay. So with fresh milled flour, they say you want it more wet. So I don't really use flour to shape them, I use oil. Okay, so here's what I'm thinking. I want to get a bit of a so let's get one of them into the pan. That's one. For those of you who knows what that means. Squeeze out the air. Okay, so they call it like, I think they call it surface tension. You're trying to pull it, let the underneath part pull it taut. And now that has to rise till it's doubled. So let's get that proofing again. And then hopefully we get a good rise. Alrighty. Okay, do you know what lives inside of that box? This is one of my favorite possessions that I have. You guessed it, Grandma's diaries. I feel like somehow these came via Shirley or something like that. Gertie's diaries do not throw out. Oh, they are from Shirley. You know, Shirley, thank you for passing these on to me because I really love them and maybe do things with them that no one thought. So, sorry, this box is a bit loud. Okay, so there they are. 5 diaries, I have one out. So those go from 1968 until the end. And what was also in that box, well, it's a good thing we got some extra pantyhose. Oh my gosh. Look at all the pantyhose that were bought on sale. Remember the sand store? Hilarious. The other thing that was in that box is some guest books. And you know, when you think about a guest book, it is pretty old-fashioned. So this is for Grandma and Grandpa's 60th wedding anniversary. They were married, right, on the 12th day of November in 1925. This is a very custom book. Like, this was very much done in a custom way. It was held in Snowflake, August 4th, 1985, and the 60th wedding guests. So let's snoop and see if we got any names. Oh, Jim and Lillian Wallcraft. I know who they are. Gautier's. Jean Smith. Marilee. Earl and Gladys Booker. Valerie Bamford. It's just a collage of people we know. Robert and Shirley. Irma and Roy. Me. Karen. Doug and Donna Brown. Lisa Brown, Hazel Taylor, Sandra, Aaron and Holly Taylor. Oh, it just goes on and on. Ken and Faye McCannell, Everett and Eileen Smith, Elsie Brown, Ray and Bob. You know, it just goes on and on. McNabbs, Daly Lane and Leanne Smith. Just Dorothy and Buff Gore, Ken and Cheryl, Tyler, Stacy. You know, John and Katie Harms, Lauren and Fern Moore. Oh my God, I could just go on and on. This is fun. Okay, I probably can't go through the whole book. Oh, look, Vern Booker. Come on. That's awesome. This would just be names of community people and people that we know. Interesting. Well, anyway, yeah, I just think that a guest book is something people will maybe never experience, but I believe that their event was held at the curling rink with the 2 other couples there. So just to get a shot at what's inside a 5-year diary. So first of all, You get to compare the same day. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. And Grandma had very neat handwriting. And in here, she would always tell the weather. You better be prepared when you're reading these because, man, she talks about baking and what she's making, and you could get really... Don't read her diaries when you're hungry. That's my advice. And she's very factual and just recorded a lot of things, you know, that... I don't know if she knew the significance of it then. She keeps track of all the dances being played for. Bob and Wayne played at Mather. Bob and Wayne played at Killarney. And then at the end of the year, she would total up how many dances. So there was 43 dances played for in 1978. 31 in 79. 25... 26, and then 2 with the Nomads, that's a different band, in 1980. 23 in 1981. You know, like, she just really kept track of stuff. And of course, you know, not knowing that I would get interested in the history and become a little bit of a historian and get people coerced into telling stories. You know, there's been a lot of things that were really helpful if I was trying to find a date. But it's, you know, I gotta tell you, it's tricky because if you're really looking for something, it's a little bit like trying to find a needle in a haystack. But if Dad can help me figure out the year, I can sometimes find it. So, you know, I think that probably nobody's making use of these diaries as much as me. So I'm pretty glad that they ended up in my hands. And I often think about what Grandma might have thought when she was writing them. Did she think anybody else would read them? Well, I just think that she would have no idea that we're using them as a source of documenting. So, oh yeah, I was going to tell you. I was looking up a few things that we've discussed in Grandma's diary to get some dates. And you guys were always wondering back and forth if the year you built the machine shed was 1980 or what it was. It was 78. And
the shed, which was constructed, this particular shed was constructed in 1980, I believe. Well, possibly before. I remember Grandpa being 80 years old, up on the very top of the rafters, hammering away on the sheets of metal.
And I don't know what year it was that we did that. I'm thinking it must have been about 1980 when we built that machine shed.
Well, in Grandma's diary, when she's talking about it, she's just mentioning how much time Elgin is spending out building with you guys.
Okay.
There's a stretch of days where she mentions that.
It would likely have been the last summer that Wayne was home before he started doing other things, because he was there all that summer. And we didn't do any trips that year at all because we had to concentrate on getting that to fit in around all the other work that had to be done.
And it's all in Grandma's diary. I'm going to have to figure out a way to share it. It's really interesting. And anyway, I thought you guys might be interested to know the year.
Okay, so then it must have been the spring of 77 then, must have been the year that the shop burned down.
It was 77.
Because we didn't build a...
Did you think it was that soon, though, that you built the machine shed? Because I thought you guys even called it Rob's last summer there, but I don't know if it was the last summer in 78. You didn't waste any time making that, did you?
Well, no, like I said, we had made quite a few plans ahead of time that was going to happen somewhere. We didn't know it was going to happen where the old shop was.
Right.
But I already had the telephone poles, and I had a plan in my head as to how that would happen. And so anyway, so
it starts on a certain date, I think in July, where you start measuring for the machine shed.
Probably.
Grandma calls it the new building quite a bit, sometimes the machine shed.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I'll just talk quick because it's about to run out. You guys were saying it's not like we just shut down and built the machine shed for 2 months. It was on top of everything else that was going on at the time. And what's interesting is Grandma's entries during that time tells the story of exactly what else was going on in the yard. And I thought fascinating because it completely ties in with what you said. And Grandma would never know the importance of all of her documenting and what we're doing with that now.
Well, that's interesting. Mhm.
And Grandpa would also not know how much we're admiring his trees.
True.
I kind of like both of those things. I really do.
We don't know what he knows. We hope he knows something about it.
Well, I just don't think that either one of them would expect that, but might be a pleasant surprise. So,
Right. Mm-hmm.
I think so.
Yeah. Yeah, that was...
Way to go, Grandma. I really appreciate having them. And I got to hear about what was happening on the other side of the trees. Super interesting. Okay, it's ready to pop in the oven. I always wish I get a bigger rise, but I don't want to overproof. I think it's looking pretty good. Ow. Here we go. Okay. Okay, bread's ready. Look out, little Rocky. I got a fairly good rise. What do you think? It smells amazing in here. There's just nothing like fresh bread, am I right? Turned out very nice. I have something on the shelf in the office that I'll bet you will not be able to guess what this is. Well, two of you will be able to guess what this is. Any ideas? Okay, I'll tell you more after the clip. Lovely.
Had a discussion with Auntie Mary and Dad both about the trees. I have a clip, Rob, from you on your documentary there. What you said was, I hoed these trees with Grandpa up and down these roads. What a way to spend the summer. Grandpa and his hoe rooting around. That's the quote unquote.
Okay.
So I think I was wondering more about what you guys, if anything, lessons that you might have learned doing that, or that you observed about Grandpa, and certainly his practices on, you know, keeping his hoe clean after each use and sharp, and if you guys do that.
Well, for sure. We learned that early, that anytime you use a tool that comes in contact with soil, you clean it afterwards and wipe it dry so it doesn't rust. Mm. And you keep the edge sharp, which you do with a file usually. If it gets too bad, you have to use a grinder, but usually a file.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that Grandpa always had with him, and Dad, I think you did too, was, if I remember right, it was a some kind of a cleaning device that had come off of either a disker or something, but it was like a mini shovel-shaped device, metal.
I still got several of those.
And would keep them in his pocket and constantly be cleaning that hoe off, or shovel, or whatever we were working with, using that as a device to just work the dirt off of it and keep going.
Yeah, and that had come off a drill, actually, a seed drill. In certain kinds of soil, the discs would get clogged up, so they had these cleaner blades that slid against them and cleaned the dirt off.
Mm-hmm.
But when we dismantled an old drill, we saved all those, and I've still got some of them.
So after I learned about this, I asked Dad if he had a spare one that I could have. And, he said he'd have a look. And knowing Dad, you know what he's like. He doesn't say anything to me for a long time. And then one day he just shows up here, him and Barb, for a visit. I think it was at Christmas. And he pulls this out and he painted it green and he put a little curve into it, which probably makes it a little easier to use. And now I have the same tool that was kept in 3 generations of pockets while making the shelter belt around the farm that used to be part of an old disker. And I'm going to say something I thought I'd never say. I'm a little bit sad that I don't have a hoe and I don't have any weeds to hoe. So I'm never going to get a chance to really experience it and use it. But I'm going to keep it on my shelf as a little piece of history. And a little reward maybe for asking some questions and getting some stories told, because I would never, ever, ever know about something like this unless I showed interest and asked. So I think that's quite a great story behind that little device. So Rob has Grandpa's original harmonica that he played all the time. And if you look at the picture here, you can see that it was well loved and certainly played a lot. Remember this? He had like a newer one. Well, I got the newer one. So I tried to play something. This will show how talented Grandpa is. I don't think this is easy to play. Okay, let's try one I know better. Now you try.
Grandpa, tell me about them good old days. Sometimes it feels like this world's gone crazy. Grandpa, take me back to yesterday, when the line between right and wrong didn't seem so hazy. Did lovers really fall in love to stay and stand beside each other come what may? Was a promise really something people kept, not just something they would say? Did families really bow their heads to pray? Did daddies really never go away? Whoa, whoa, Grandpa, tell me about them good old days.
Grandpa, tell me about the good old days. Sometimes it feels like this world's gone crazy. And Grandpa, take me back to yesterday, when the line between right and wrong didn't seem so hazy. Did lovers really fall in love to stay and stand beside each other come what may? Was a promise really something people kept, not just something they would say? Families really bow their heads to pray. Daddies really never go away. Whoa, Grandpa, tell me about the good old days. Grandpa. Everything is changing fast. We call it progress, but I just don't know. And Grandpa, let's wander back into the past, then paint me a picture of long ago.
Grandpa, everything is changing fast. Oh, we call it progress, but I just don't know. Oh, Grandpa, let's wander back into the past and paint me a picture of long ago. Did lovers really fall in love to stay and stand beside each other come one may? Was a promise really something people kept, not just something they would say and then